Please don't say Pittsburgh.
Somewhere in Pennsylvania that starts with a P. Not the same thing.
Pittsburgh might as well be Ohio. So we count it out. All right.
I'm in Kentucky, so I'm not technically in Ohio. So I won't take offense there.
Right on.
All right. You ready to do this?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And before we jump into the normal stuff today, I want to give a shout out to Ernest for leaving some awesome feedback for the Beyond UX Design book, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. And if you get either the free preview or you pre-order the full book from beyonduxdesign.com/book, you leave some honest feedback, you'll get a chance to win a shout out on the show just like this, a badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker, a free book, or even a chance to have a one-on-one with me. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book and pre-order your copy for over 50% off. And I'm only a couple of weeks out from releasing the full version, and I'm really excited about that. I can't wait to share that full version with all y'all, but that 50% off deal is only good for another couple of weeks, so don't miss out. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and a bunch of other people too and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's a steal. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. This week's episode is brought to you by Jeff White's UX Storytelling Toolkit. Now, lots of people talk about the importance of storytelling for UX designers, but Jeff brings actionable clarity to the concept, and he showed you exactly how to do it. He breaks down different real-world scenarios like how to use different storytelling methods to present your work to clients and stakeholders, how to craft a better case study for your portfolio, and how to improve portfolio presentations for job interviews. And I love Jeff's approach to storytelling here. It's not your simple once upon a time kind of stuff. And since you're an amazing listener, and I know this course will help you out so much, I've partnered with Jeff to get everybody listening a 10% discount if you use the code BeyondUX when you check out. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/storytelling and use the code BeyondUX to get 10% off Jeff's storytelling course. So learn some incredible techniques to influence your team and advance your UX career. So I am so excited today to have the one and only Dan Mall on the show. If you're listening to this show and you haven't heard of Dan Mall yet, I don't know what the hell you're doing. You're living under a rock. But Dan is super talented guy, Design System University, all this cool stuff. Just wrote an awesome book about design systems. And we were talking a little bit before the show. And we're like, everybody asked Dan about design systems and all that stuff. So we're going to talk about something else. We might touch on design systems a little bit, but we're not going to talk about strictly design systems today because, Dan, you're more than design systems, dude. So you got all kinds of stuff we're going to talk about today. Junior designers, especially, I think you're going to get a lot out of this show. So I am super excited. Dan Mall is a husband, a dad, a teacher, creative director, designer, founder, and entrepreneur from Philly. Not Pittsburgh. I made that mistake earlier. Definitely not Pittsburgh. He runs Design System University, where he creates, collects, and curates curriculum, content, and community to help enterprise teams design at scale. He also co-founded Great Job, a platform that helps parents and caregivers design their own handbook for raising amazing kids, which, by the way, I love it, dude. I said it to my wife last week, and we've been listening to the podcast. Awesome stuff. Previously, Dan ran design system consultancy Super Friendly for over a decade. Dan writes about design systems, process, and leadership and other issues on his site, danmall.com, and in his weekly newsletter and on Twitter and Instagram. So, Dan, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on.
Yes.
How's it going, man?
It's going great. Jeremy, thank you for having me on. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about more than just design systems. I love talking about design systems, but I am a rich tapestry of other things as well. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited for the conversation we're going to have.
I'm super excited to have it on. So it's funny because, we were talking before the show and we did a last minute pivot, and I think this is going to work out a lot better. But it's interesting because we talk about, Dan as, and I think a lot of people think of Dan, author, influencer, all this stuff, speaker. He's made it big, but you started somewhere, right? You started, everybody starts as a junior designer. And it's interesting to kind of think about your career and how you've gotten to where you are today. and some key takeaways that some other folks who might just be starting out in their career, mid-level designers, even senior designers, what kind of things do they need to think about to get to a place like where you're at today? So that said, we're going to talk about all that stuff today, but tell us a little bit about you and tell us how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, totally. And, I think about that often, because I've been very lucky to be a junior designer in the way that I was. And I know we'll talk about some of that stuff. And I really credit my experiences there to what I'm able to do today. So now, I as you mentioned, I run an agency, I run a consultancy and an education platform called Design System University, and I've done a bunch of things. I've started a bunch of businesses. I've worked for other people. I've run design teams. I've run interactive teams. But as you said, like before all of that stuff, I was a senior designer, and before that, I was a mid-level designer, and before that, I was a junior designer, and before that, I was an intern, and before that, I was what titles have I had? Web designer / strategist, a web developer / designer. I had a lot of slashes in my titles. And I remember very fondly being in school. And I remember very vividly being being an intern and being like, how do I get to the next level? And that being really difficult, not like, because I just didn't know how to do it. And not that there weren't people supporting me, but it was like, sometimes you don't know where the ladders are. You don't know what the paths are. And you end up just like feeling around in the dark. And I think that's it's a really poor experience. It was for me at parts. And I know for a lot of people nowadays, you would think that whatever it is, 15 years later, that it'd be easier for folks. But I know from talking to people, for a lot of people, it's not. It's even worse sometimes for people. So, the more that people like you and me can do to illuminate that stuff and say like, here's what we did, here's what you can do. I'm all for that.
It was interesting you mentioned that too, because like just thinking about our conversation that we had earlier when we were talking about topics for the show, right? Your publisher reached out and started this conversation, and I was like, can I just holler at Dan and we'll talk? It was funny because the first thing we thought is like, let's talk about design systems. And, as you get higher in your career, you start to become known for things. And you mentioned it's actually might be a little bit harder sometimes to kind of evolve because you become known for things. And so it's like, I don't want to just do this all the time. Can I please talk about something else? I think a lot of junior designers, they don't necessarily think about that. They talk about wanting to niche down and we talk about being a generalist all the time. And then you sort of like appreciate being able to be a generalist the older you get or maybe the more experience you get, because you kind of get sick of doing the same thing. Not that you're sick of design systems, obviously, but you get stuck doing the same thing over and over again. It becomes monotonous. And then I think often what happens there is you lose the passion for it after a while when you just are stuck doing it over and over and over again. And, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm kind of curious what like your perspective there, because clearly you're known as the design system guy. Anytime someone says, here's a list of UX people, they always say, Dan Mall, the design system guy. How does that make you feel? Is that it's got to be kind of like nice, but then also too a little frustrating, I would imagine.
I think it's that it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I think it's good business advice. Like a lot of my businesses were successful because we and my team, we picked a position, and we said, this is the thing that we are doing. And I think, and it was great. And it continues to be great. And I think that there's a lot of good things from that. And that is still advice that I give to junior designers and to people that's starting their own thing, is like, pick a thing. Because if you say that you're going to do everything, people don't know how to trust you. They don't know how to believe you. Like, no one is good at everything. So when you pretend that you are or come off as you are, like, it's hard to believe you. It's much easier to believe someone when they say like, this is a thing that I've been doing for a while. And so naturally I'm probably better at this than people who haven't been doing this as a focus for a while. Like, that just seems like a natural thing. So I think it's good advice. I recommend it to people for business. And then also the thing that can be true at the same time is that, we are not just the thing that we do at work. We are not just the thing that we do in our positioning statements or in our, niches or anything like that. We are humans, and we do lots of other stuff. And so I recently learned about this idea called the multi-hyphenate, or the multi-potentialite, which means like, people who do a bunch of things, people who don't have one calling. There are some people who do have one calling and one thing that they do, and that's cool. And there are other people that don't, and that's cool too. All of those things can work for people. And so I think it is a rich canvas that people can pull from and pick from. And then also people have the ability to change too. Like I've been doing this for more than 2 decades now. So I've seen waves come and go. I've seen things that were big that are not big anymore. And so to tie yourself to one thing and not allow yourself the ability to change, I think that we need to give ourselves that permission too before we let the world or expect the world to do that for us.
And I think something I've seen just a ton of junior designers do especially is they strive for that title, right? They say like, I want to be senior whatever. I want to be UX designer, blah, blah, blah. And that's their thing. And they stake their identity on that title. And what's interesting is once you get it, you realize like, it's just a job, it's just a job. And I'm so much more than this, just like you said. And I think that's something that a lot of junior designers, not every junior designer, but a lot of junior designers, they just get laser focused on achieving that one thing. Right. But after you do it for a while, you realize like, this is so like, shallow maybe is the wrong word, but because I hate to say that because it's not shallow, but you know what I mean. It's just there's more depth to me, I think, is kind of the thing. And we've got some mutual acquaintances like Frank Bach, for instance, who awesome designer, but he's got a hardcore band, and he records and like all this stuff. I think is like really interesting, when designers kind of branch out and do. Well, anybody really, not just designers, but branch out and do just like other stuff, hobby, side projects and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I will say, I remember being a senior designer and you couldn't tell me anything about anything other than how I could get to be art director. Like that was the thing that I was laser focused on, was like, I wanted to be called an art director. I thought of myself as an art director. I thought I'd been doing that work for a long time when I was a senior designer, but I wanted to be recognized for it. I wanted that to come, I'm generally pretty intrinsically motivated, but I have a little bit of extrinsic motivation that I need. I wanted a boss to give me that title. I wanted a manager to say, we recognize the skill in you. And so I chased that for a long time. And I will say, like, now it's not important to me, but that doesn't mean that it was empty. At the time, like, I was really proud of having achieved that. And when I got there, I felt accomplished. And it wasn't like, well, now I'm done in life, or anything like that. But it was like, that was a plateau that I worked hard to achieve. And I think it gives you a lot of other stuff when you shoot for something and are able to achieve it. It doesn't mean like you're done, you've made it. It just gives you the reps to be able to go like, I worked for a thing and I accomplished it, and I worked for a thing and I accomplished it, and I worked for a thing and what else can I work for and accomplish now too? So even though it's like, well, I'm no longer trying to go for art director because art director is a title that I've had now. Now it's like, well, what about creative director? Or okay, now that I have creative director, what about VP? Now that I have that, what about that? I think when there's a thing called Goodhart's Law. It's the idea that when a measure becomes a target, it fails to be a good measure anymore. Right? Like, is it Goodhart's Law? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I actually have never heard the title of it, but we used to use that in like my old job, talking about like agile
right.
metrics and things like that. That was something everybody would always say. Like, when you make the measure the target, it's not a measure anymore. But yeah, I didn't know there was a name. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the name. We'll look it up and show notes it. But like, I think that's the thing is, if it becomes the target, I think that's where it tips over into being less useful for you. But if it's a measure, if it's a way that you get to measure progress, I mean, how else would I know I'm getting better in my career? Titles are one way to do that. Titles are a way to go. Sure. Like, well, 5 years ago, I was a junior designer, and now I'm an art director, or now I'm a creative director, or 10 years from now, I'm a VP. That is a way to measure your progress. It's not the target, but if you're using that as a way to measure, I could see that, I see that being very healthy for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'm curious about from your perspective is you've obviously worked with a lot of different teams. You've worked in a lot of different environments, right? And, we always hear about the realities of the job versus what you learn in school. And often what people are really talking about there is, struggling to have buy-in, struggling to get your voice heard, quote unquote, seat at the table. We always hear about, a lot of times that's tied to the concept of maturity and, teams not working as effectively as they could and lack of process and all that stuff. And so I'm curious from your perspective, when you've got a junior designer or somebody who's looking to get ahead in their career, often, based on the Nielsen Norman Group survey, we know that 40, 50%, maybe more are relatively middle or low maturity. So it's most likely you're going to end up in these environments if you aren't there already. So as a junior designer looking to kind of advance your career, I'm curious, what have you seen or what advice might you have for those designers who are struggling in some of those environments to get known, to get ahead, to get promotions and things like that?
So I think there's some ideal answers, and then there's some pragmatic answers. And so I'll share what I've learned about each of those things. I think part of the ideal answer is like, well, you just got to get so good that people can't deny you. It's like, that would work. Like if you were just like the best, then
Uh-huh.
yeah, you would get heard. Trying to get to the point where you become the best, that you're just so good that people just, can't help but listen to you. That's hard to do. That's really, I don't know a
Sure.
lot of
Yeah.
people that have been
Yeah.
able, I certainly haven't been able to do that in my career. So if you can do that, if you see a path to doing that, by all means, go for it. That's a good way to just straight up earn your seat at the table. For the rest of us, I think that sponsorship is a really important thing. I remember reading a Harvard
Mm.
Business Review article a few years ago about how specifically women in the workplace are over-mentored and under-sponsored. I don't know if that's still true
Wow.
today. I imagine that at least some of that would be true. I also imagine that that would be true for people of color and people who are generally underrepresented in tech. And so I think that there are a lot of mentors out there, and I think that that's good. I think there are not a lot of sponsors out there. And I was lucky to have a lot of good sponsors when I was sort of coming up as a junior designer. I remember working with a creative director once who basically, he never said, I'm going to sponsor you or anything like, and that didn't have, that wasn't an official designation, but by all signs, he was definitely my sponsor. And what that looked like was, I remember him saying to me, like, I remember being really frustrated that in meetings, I would say things and no one would care about them when I was a junior designer, mid-level designer. And then he would say the
Yeah.
same things. And then people go, hey, that's a really good idea. Yeah, we should do that. And I'm like, dude, I just said the same thing. I just said
It's so
that. And I
frustrating.
remember
Yeah.
like having a private conversation where I was venting to him and he was like, hey, Dan, like, I agree that this is not fair. It is how it works. Like, I don't think that it should work that way, but you let me know how you want to work here. He's like, if it's really about the idea that you want to get across, then what you can do is you can use me as an ally, tell your ideas to me, and I will make sure that your ideas get through. I don't know that you'll always get credit for them, but if that's something that's important to you, we can work on that in a different way. If it's about the idea that you want to get through, let me help you in that. If it's about you getting credit for stuff, though, I don't know how much I can help you with that. And so I had to reconcile that, like, is it about the idea or is it about me just wanting to get the credit for something? And different times it was different. It was different versions of that. But most of the time, at that time, I was like, I just want to do the work that I can do to get good stuff in my portfolio. So right now, it's more about the idea than it is about the credit. I don't care about the credit. I care about, like, this is a thing that is made now, and I get a hand in it, and I get to say that, we did this as a team. And so that's the thing that I did with him is we would have one-on-ones and I would say, hey, here's the thing that I'm thinking about this. And he would go and advocate for those ideas. Sometimes his technique for advocating for those was actually not letting people know that I was the one who said it, because that's what it was, is when people found out, hey, the junior person said that, they discredit it. Not that that's right, but sometimes that's how it goes. And so, that was a big learning moment for me of going like, how can I use sponsors in a way that might not be right, but does it advance my goals? In a way it does. So I'm going to be okay with this, and I'm going to be okay with doing this. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for stuff like that. If we are able to release and relinquish our egos, there are times where we shouldn't relinquish our egos. And I think there are times where we should, or where it becomes useful. So like, I have a lot of examples like that, that people did for me and that I was a part of, that did help me advance in my career.
The interesting thing too here is when we talk about low maturity environments, it's, the hallmark is lack of process, lack of standardization, lack of repeatable process. And so in those cases, there's probably ideas coming from all over the place, right? And where that idea comes from in a low maturity environment generally changes how it's perceived. If it's higher up, people are probably going to be, yep, yes, sir. The boss said that, let's go do it, versus a junior designer. And what's interesting when you think about moving up in your career, what matters less is that the team knows it was your idea. What matters is that your boss knows that it was your idea, And so if that person is advocating for you and knows that it's a good idea, when it comes time to those year-end reviews and, raises and those kinds of conversations, the fact that your boss knew it was your idea is what matters, not that he's giving you credit, he or she is giving you credit through the broader team, right?
Yes, totally. I wrote this article called "The Work Always Wins," and I think one of the things that, especially in enterprise environments, is like everyone loves to talk.
Yeah.
Like everybody loves to talk, and so I think we as an industry, we don't have a good barometer for knowing, like, is some of this, like, what if this talk is real, and what if this talk is cheap? Part of my worldview about work is that ideas are cheap, because all of us have them. So if we're just talking about ideas, that's not a good way to get buy-in for anything. If we're just, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Well, sometimes we just got to sit down and do the thing, and then we advocate for it after it's made, not before it's made. I think a lot of us want to do this. I'm certainly guilty of this. I've done this a lot of times where I'm like, I want to do this, I want to do this. And people are like, well, that's a bad idea. And in my head, it's a good idea. But now I realize like, oh, there's no way for them to know that it's a good idea because they can't see it. It's in my head. I didn't manifest it yet. So sometimes you got to manifest it. And sometimes it's less about, advocating for yourself. I think that's important. And I think that has a role. And a lot of times it's just like, sit down and do the work, and then show the work and then talk about the work you did as opposed to the work you want to do, right? Because if you're just talking about the work that you want to do that you're never doing, you're just whining. And if you're just whining about it, it gets annoying to people. And instead, if you're constantly churning out work and showing the work that you're doing and then talking about the work that you did, I think it's a different conversation. And then, I totally agree with what you said as well, which is that once the work is done, especially if you have good sponsors, then they will advocate for you because they will advocate for the work that you have done, not work that you want to do, not work that you're capable of, not work that you have the potential to do. Even if all those things are true, then they can advocate, hey, Dan did this thing and that thing and that. And, this creative director that I work with, he did that for me. It was sponsoring me in lots of different ways. It was working with me through like pre the work. And then once the work was done, he did advocate to my boss all the time and say, hey, I think we need to move Dan to a different level because look at the body of evidence that he has here, of all the things that he has done. And what he didn't say there was he didn't give himself credit, for how much he sponsored me through that, which I think is a really humble thing. And I'm really grateful for. He could have taken all the credit for that, but like, I think that's what a good sponsor looks like. And I think that's how you can advocate in an effective way is do the work. And now there's something to advocate for, not just ideas, because ideas are cheap and everybody has them and all of us can talk about them. So we can't quite tell the difference between the real work and the potential work and the work that is, could be good versus the work that already exists and is good.
And something you called out there too, I want to circle back to, was the idea that, you could talk about the work and you could talk about ideas, but until you, design the thing, build the thing and show it to people, often, that doesn't get the point across. And what's interesting there, I think something a lot of junior designers do not do is they don't get to know their team well enough to know how to communicate effectively with those people, because stakeholders, product managers, they're not monoliths. Every single person is a person with a different personality and a different communication style. So, you could say this is how you talk to stakeholders all day long, but it could be completely irrelevant to that context that you're in because your stakeholders might be totally different.
I love that.
So I think one thing that I've seen a lot of junior designers do is they want raises and promotions and they think often that the work will get me there, which is true. You have to do the work, but if you can't communicate the effectiveness of the work or the value of the work with the right people, it won't get you there. Yeah. So it's obviously like a balance of both. You have to know how to do the work. Tools are obviously important. Technical skills are important, but that internal networking piece, I think, is something a lot of junior design, and you also talk about building sponsors and allies. You have to, you can maybe do it with your boss, but what if it's not your boss? What if it's another stakeholder? So there's allies and sponsors you can have all throughout your team. And especially if we talk about enterprise, like these giant teams with hundreds or thousands of people sometimes, you can't always rely on your boss, and I think that's something a lot of junior designers or juniors in general, if engineers, whatever, they just kind of forget about that. I'm curious your thoughts there. Any experience like working those big teams and finding those allies outside of like just your direct manager?
Wow, 100%. I think when I was a junior, I had this like fiction that like, when I get to a good place or a good design agency or whatever it is, I'm going to have a boss and they're going to be awesome. They're going to mentor me and they're going to stick up for me and they're going to do all stuff. And I've been lucky to have bosses and managers like that. And I've also had the experience of not having bosses and managers like that. And one of the rude awakenings that I've realized at one point was like, sometimes I have to do my boss's job. Like in order for me to get recognized or in order for something to happen, I actually have to do my boss's job for them. And I wish someone had said this to me in this way because it took me many years to kind of understand this. But one of the quickest ways to get promoted is to somehow get my boss promoted. One of the quickest ways for me to get a raise is to get my boss a raise. So so thinking about like, what is it that would get my boss a raise? Like that's not an idea that occurs to a junior person, often.
No, never. Yeah.
And so if you start thinking about like, okay, well, my boss is the VP of infrastructure, whatever. My boss is the VP of design here. What gets my boss a raise? if you can think about that kind of stuff, then you can start to take work away from your boss. And then, years later, when I became a boss, when I became a manager, I found myself saying that to a lot of my juniors and a lot of the people that work for me, where I'm like, how can you take work away from me? If you can take work away from me, I'm going to see you as an asset. That's a person that helps me all the time. That's a person where working with them is actually less work for me, whereas most people that you manage are actually more work for you. So how can you be the person that actually is like, oh, that person, every time I work with that person, my week gets lighter, my workload gets lighter. I don't have to worry about that thing anymore. Like, those have always been the most exciting people for me to work with. I'm like, I'll work with them anytime because they always make my day easier. And so when you're in the other position, when you're a junior person, how do you what can you do to be that person? What can you do? Again, that's one of those things that's not right. You shouldn't be doing your boss's job for you. They are in more of a position of power. They get paid more than you. They have more influence than you. People listen to them more than you. And yet you've got to do their job. That sucks. But a lot of times that's the way to get ahead, is to figure out what you can do to kind of alleviate that workload from your boss. So 100%, agree with what you're saying is, a lot of that stuff, I think you have to figure out how to be helpful and how to be valuable in that way. And that is a way for you to then get ahead, is if you're thinking about how other people get ahead too. And there's a service mentality that comes with that. There's a humility that comes with that. And I wish that more people were service oriented and more people were humble, in the workplace. A lot of times that's not what happens, but I feel like the more you can do that, you are thinking about your boss. You are thinking about, well, how do they listen to things? How do they receive things? How do they like to communicate to me? And like, you start to take those things into account, and you start to identify the things that, like, oh, if I do it like that, if I send them a long email, they're going to hate me. If I record a Loom video for them, though, they prefer, or if I schedule a meeting with them, they don't really like that. But if I do it during their lunch break and I send them a memo, I slip a memo under their door, like, that's what they respond well to. Like, knowing those kinds of things is a great way to get ahead.
Something else that's kind of interesting, you mentioned this a second ago, and I think this is worth calling out. You mentioned, sometimes your boss is not going to do the things you thought they were going to do. And sometimes your boss is not going to help you like you thought. And I think something that a lot of junior designers really fail to see is that a lot of times, this isn't always the case, but a lot of times bosses are brand new to being a boss, like junior bosses. And so just because you're a really great designer or engineer, whatever you are, does not make you a good boss. And so a lot of times you're going to end up with those bosses, and this might be the first time they've ever had to do this. And, sometimes they're malicious, sometimes they're just terrible people, but a lot of times, most of the time, they just don't necessarily know how to be a great boss. And unfortunately, a lot of companies do not invest in leadership training, don't invest in management training, don't invest in their managers to help their managers be better managers. Yeah. And I think when we talk about maturity, this plays into that as well, right? And so that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. Something I want to kind of talk a little bit about and shift the conversation a little bit too is this idea of maturity and dealing with those inefficient, poorly executed, poorly run teams. So as a junior designer, right, we mentioned this, I'm curious from your perspective, like some advice you would give junior designers to navigate those teams that aren't run effectively or efficiently, and where, they don't have the input that they think they should have or the seat at the table. How do those designers work to get ahead without quitting? Because obviously quitting is very hard right now. Yeah, totally. You don't want to be out of a job. Yes. If you can afford to work, maybe it's best to stick with it. So what is some advice there? Any thoughts?
I like to balance the ideal with the pragmatic. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And so there are some ideal things that you can do, and there's some pragmatic things that you can do. When I was a junior, I was very idealistic. Like, I was incredibly ambitious, and I was like, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to change the world, right? It's like that idea. And for some teams you can, and some teams you can't, or you can't right now. And so I think we got to balance like what those things are. One of the things that I don't see juniors doing a lot is trying to increase their capacity for awareness, right? So like, how can you assess the team that you're on, even doing it, and I'm going to invoke some standard business frameworks here that, like, I'm a little bit eye-rolly at, but they work sometimes. So SWOT analysis as an example, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Have you ever done a SWOT analysis on your own team? What is our team really good at? What is our team weak at? What are the opportunities for our team? What are the threats to our team? Like, that helps you even just be aware. You don't even have to do anything with that data. Just knowing it and going like, until I wrote it down on this paper, I didn't realize that our team is actually really bad at communicating. Like now that I'm thinking about it, that's actually something that we are not very good at. Once you have that, like just being aware of that allows you to understand the context that you're working within. If we're really bad at communicating, I no longer need to be surprised when we have trouble with something that has to do with communication. Like, of course that fell through the cracks because it was communication related. And then the next step to that is if you decide to take on this mission, is you can use that analysis then to go, what of these things can I change little by little? One of the things that I'm learning a lot recently, I would say in the last 5 years or so, especially working with big enterprise, is there's always a ceiling to the amount of change that any given organization can handle. And that organization can be your whole company, thousands and thousands of people. It could be your team unit of 4 people or 5 people. But there's always a ceiling. Some teams have a high capacity, a high ceiling for we can adopt a lot of change and we would do fine with that. And some teams it's wait, we're going to move from Sketch to Figma. That's as much as we can do this year. It's okay, cool. That's identifying that and knowing, okay, that's the amount of change that we can handle and that's okay. Then you can figure out how to operate in that. So once you do an analysis, you can do things like go, this year or this quarter or this month or whatever your time frame is, I'm going to try to change one thing to improve the way that we communicate, or we'll change one thing to improve the way that we do critiques, or the way that we do, we evaluate design quality, or the way that we do, whatever those things are. So an example of that could be for design quality is you could be the first person on your team to write a rubric for what quality means on our team. Most teams don't have a rubric for it, right? And that's a thing that who should be doing that? Your boss should be doing that. Your VP of design, your design director should have written the rubric for quality. But you know what? Like you were saying, Jeremy, they might not know how. They might not even know to do that because you know what? They were just a junior designer that grew up. They're not trained to be, it's called the Peter Principle, that employees rise to the level of their own incompetence, right? That happens to everybody. You get promoted to the point where you're like, I don't know how to be a design director. I went to school to be a designer, not a design director. So if you assume positive intent, if you give people the benefit of doubt and go I know that my design director should be writing a rubric for what quality means on our team. They just didn't know that they should do that. And I listened to some podcast and listened to some guy say it. So I'm going to go do it, right? So I'm going to go do that thing and I'm going to do that for our team. And that might be the amount of change that we can handle for the quarter, but that's my contribution to how our team improves. And I think that if everyone on your team did that, quarter by quarter, you would increase and you would up level the level of maturity on your team. It might take a while, it might take 2 years, but I think that's the way, those marginal gains kind of help you get to the next level of maturity over time.
I love that you call this out too, because when you think about maturity, often it's, a leadership thing, right? And I do believe ultimately maturity is a leadership problem. But I also believe that you can effectively work with your core team, the little 4 or 5 person team like you're talking about, to influence how your team works, right? And you're not going to influence the overall org. You're not going to influence the thousands of people that you work with, but you can certainly influence how your team works with you at the very least, And I love that you're calling that out because I strongly believe low maturity is not a death sentence. It is not the end of your career. You can still do great work and solve really cool problems. It just might be kind of a pain in the ass,
yes, exactly.
And it might just be a little bit harder than it should be. And, you're not going to be embraced like you thought you were when you graduated your boot camp, But, you can still do awesome work. One thing that speaking about that. So I had this really awesome conversation with a buddy of mine not long ago about enterprise software in general and how we were comparing enterprise software to one-ply toilet paper, right? And so when you think about one-ply toilet paper, right, nobody likes it. It's thin, rough, it's miserable to use. Yet when you go to any public bathroom anywhere in the world, I would imagine, you're going to find one-ply toilet paper. And the question is, if everybody hates one-ply toilet paper so much, why is it so ubiquitous, right? And I think the answer is because the people who pay for it aren't the ones who have to use it, right? Which is exactly enterprise software, the problem with enterprise software often, right? And so I've spent a lot of my career in enterprise. I know you have as well. I'm very passionate about, helping people that really don't get a choice in the software they use to help them make their day better because often they're already under stress. Why, the software shouldn't add to it, right? So I'm curious, right? If we think about enterprise software as one-ply toilet paper, right? Nobody that's building enterprise software wants to deliver one-ply institutional toilet paper. We want to deliver the Charmin extra double strength 4 rolls in one, right? but constraints, budgets, timelines, things like that. So I'm curious from your perspective, like as a junior designer who wants to deliver better software, working in enterprise, but is hamstrung, handcuffed maybe, what kind of things can a junior designer do to deliver that Charmin on a one-ply budget?
Okay, so I have some responses to that question. Can I also provide a counterpoint too?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. So I am one of the few people in the world that actually do prefer one-ply toilet paper. I do.
Really?
Yeah. My wife and I were just talking about this recently. It's like we have two-ply toilet paper in our house, and it is luxurious. It's like it's softer, it's nicer, but there are downsides. There are downsides to two-ply. It runs out faster because there's less of it. It's more expensive to buy.
True.
All right. So like,
expensive,
I think how, relating this metaphor back, we have to recognize that there are values to one ply. They might not be things that we individually value.
Fair enough.
There are good things about it. That it lasts longer. So if we want something to last longer, one ply is actually pretty good. Imagine going to a public restroom. And, like you said, there's always one ply in there. But imagine going to a public restroom and there not being toilet paper in there when you need it because it ran out, because all that was in there was two ply and nobody stocked enough.
Great point.
I would rather take one ply then, in that scenario, if one ply can guarantee that it's always going to be there, when I need it, when I need it at that time.
Better than your hand. Yeah.
So I think that there's value to it. They are for different things. One ply has a different purpose and a different value, and two ply has a different purpose. So as designers, I think we're trained to go like, well, two ply everything if we can, right? Like I want two ply everything. I want the most luxurious experience that I can have. But when I think about the state of enterprise software, and I'm like, why is the internal translation tool that we made on our team, why is that so much worse than the customer experience that we make for our end user? And I think it's because we had to make a choice. A lot of times it's because we had to make a choice. We only have 40 hours a week, and in those 40 hours a week, we can only build one app. So which app are we going to build? The one for our customers or the one for us? And I think that for a lot of teams, it's like, well, we can deal with the rough one ply one if that means our customers get the better experience. That's actually a really good choice. That's actually a pretty mature choice to make, for a team. It's a hard choice to make. And I think that's part of what makes it a mature choice. Is we're prioritizing our user. It's the same thing of, the cobbler's children have no shoes. Think about all the web designers who have terrible websites, but they make amazing websites for their clients and for their customers. It's because they're like, I don't have time to work on my own website. And also, it's hard. It's difficult to work on something for myself. I can make anything for any of my customers. And so all of the web designers that have the one-page website or the WordPress template as a website that they're embarrassed about, it's because the cobbler's children have no shoes. It's that. We're so busy making shoes for everybody else. We just didn't have time to make it for ourselves. So I think that's an explanation for one ply. For why things happen in one ply. And I think one of the things, this is partly why I like design systems, is how do we get it so that both our customers and we get a two-ply experience? And it's because sometimes we just need more time. Sometimes we are doing things the long, hard, stupid way. And if we had better systems, if we had better tools, if we had better things that said like, well, in 40 hours, we don't just work on one thing. We actually have time to work on one and a half. Well, then our one ply experience for us actually can be better because we just have the time and the attention to devote to it. It's not always time and attention, but that's a lot of times that's the barrier. Is if we have to pick one, there's two. If we have to pick one, we'll pick the customer facing one, and we will deal with the one ply on our own.
Yeah, I love that. It's actually some really great points there, and I think about carrying that idea over to either enterprise or even the bathroom idea. Are we willing as employees to take a pay cut so that we can afford to build better internal software?
Ooh, now we're talking. Ooh.
Or are we going to, because there's constraints and there's a finite pool of resources. So will I take a pay cut to get a better translation tool internally? Or even on the other side, if I'm in a public place, would I pay for a bathroom to get the toilet paper? Or would I just be willing to take the rough, hard one ply toilet paper? So it's all about economics too, I think, at the end of the day. And a lot of people, I don't think, necessarily realize that. But I love the analogy though, or the idea of like, that's how stuff like a design system can actually help us, because we don't need to rebuild those components twice. There's no reason why this can't function similarly on the external customer facing tool the same way as it
Totally.
does in the internal facing tool. And we can share style sheets and share everything else. There's no reason for it to be different. And I think that's something too. I mean, you know this and you preach this in your book as well, is that the design systems help with efficiency, which helps streamline processes, makes it cheaper. It's not about pretty pictures. It's about, you know, helping the company be better and more effective in doing things and using that finite set of resources to build better stuff in the same amount of time. So anyway, I love that. Yeah, that's a great counterpoint though to it.
All right, cool.
It's funny, man. This is a hilarious story. We during COVID, you remember, like nobody could buy toilet paper. My wife found on Amazon a case of like 24 rolls of institution toilet paper, and it was like the one where it's like almost a foot wide. You know, like what I'm talking about. And we had that toilet paper, dude, for like the longest time. We couldn't use it all. And we ended up saying like, you know what, screw this. I'm going to go buy her some Charmin. And we could not give that box away, dude. Like nobody, all our neighbors are like, hey, we got all this toilet paper. They're like, I don't want that. They're like, no, I'm going to go buy, you know. Anyway, I should have saved it for you, man. I could have shipped it to you.
That's right. I'll take all of it. It's great. Yeah.
What I actually told my wife was like, you know, this pandemic stuff is going to happen like every 10 years or so now going forward. I'm willing to bet. Like, can we just save the toilet paper? Like, just put it in a box somewhere and we'll have it.
Totally. Yes.
we you know, we got all this room in the basement. Can we just save the toilet paper? Anyway, that's so funny, man. I love that. So what is I'm curious what your wife has to say about your I wouldn't say love, affection, or your not. What's the right word? Yeah. I wouldn't say love. How would you describe your relationship with OnePly?
That's I've never been asked that question. Thanks for that one.
The highlight of this
my relationship with OnePly is amicable. Let's say cordial.
Amicable. Yeah. There's a utilitarian need. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing too, just about enterprise, and this is something I think often why it's always an afterthought, is it's a cost center often. And, you know, it's not making the company money. We have to pay for it for operational, reasons. And nobody wants this, but we need it to do our work. And it's often a cost center. And I think that's, again, like going back to this idea of like being as efficient as possible, right? We got to spend the money. How do we make this as good as we can so that, you know, we can use the same amount of money and have that not add extra costs? And, you know, it's just like, again, and I think it goes back to that whole idea of like the internal networking and advocating and all that stuff, which, you know, we all know, like junior design might not, but like most people know with design systems, if you build it, doesn't mean they're going to use it. You've got to figure out how to like politic and all that stuff. So anyway, man, I love that. I'm curious in thinking about the future, right? Junior designers need to get ahead. I'm curious how, if you have thought about this, like things like AI or other ways that a junior designer can use those new tools coming up to help kind of advance their career in some way, or things that they need to understand or know about things like, you know, ChatGPT. Who knows if that'll be around in a few years, but something like it will be, I'm sure. What kind of stuff would a junior designer be thinking about now to help them get ahead when it comes to stuff like AI?
It's easy for me as a creative director and somebody who's been, you know, the head of design at places and things, like it's easy for me to compare AI with an intern or with a junior designer because I use them for a lot of the same thing. I might be more rude to an AI than I am with a junior designer. You know, like I might be more polite.
You don't say please and thank you to ChatGPT.
No, I do say please and thank because I do say please and thank you when I'm like writing into prompts because I'm like, you know, one day they're gonna rise up and they're gonna be like, you know what, kill that one last because he was polite. Like he used kind words.
Yeah, Dan was nice. Yeah, save him.
Save him for later. So
I'm the
just
same
in
way,
case,
man.
you know, it doesn't hurt anything.
That's exactly why I do it. You never know. It doesn't hurt.
So what I use AI for is what is partly the way that I train interns to be good and junior designers to be good, which is like in the beginning of your career, you just need reps, like because you're not that good. And like, of course you're not that good. You don't, you know, you're new. So it's okay to be not good. How do you get good fast? You do a bunch of reps. So, you know, when I'm working with junior designers or working with interns, I'm constantly saying like, do 3 versions of this homepage or draw 10 versions of that logo, or like, it's always like, do a lot of stuff, do a lot of quantity. We're not worried about quality right now. And that's exactly what I use AI for. You know, so I use AI for like, write 10 titles for this blog post for me or for this YouTube video. Like, because I don't want to, generating is hard. And so the better you can get at that, or the more you can outsource that, the better it is. So if that's from my perspective as a senior level designer. So if I'm a junior level designer, that's what your competition is right now, right? If we want to get real about it, like that's where a lot of people are losing their jobs to, is the stuff that's commoditized is the stuff that we go, I could pay $10 a month for ChatGPT 4 or whatever, and like I can do that. That's better than paying, financially, that's better on our books than paying a junior designer, whatever, $50 an hour, $100 an hour, X amount of dollars per week. Like, so it's cheaper in that way. And it's because we see it as commoditized. And the stuff that is commoditized, we can outsource. That's the point of any good system, is as soon as it becomes a commodity, you can get the lowest experience level person or thing to do that. And I think that's what we're recognizing with AI. I think that the challenge is that we recognize that all of a sudden it just happened. Suddenly it wasn't here and then it was here. And so we're kind of caught by surprise for that. So if I'm a junior designer, start comparing, what do I do that AI can't do? And if you don't know what AI can do, go figure out what AI can do. Play with it a bunch. A lot of it is free. Go see what it can do better than you. And it's back to this awareness thing, is if your stance is, well, AI is robots and I'm a human and so I'm better, it's like, that's not nuanced enough. And that's not going to be the truth for a long time either. So what is it that you can do better than AI? And AI can generate 10 thumbnails faster than you can. Can you generate 10 thumbnails better than AI can? And how do you qualify better? So you have to start advocating for yourself and being aware of the things that you do, because a lot of times people aren't going to advocate for you in that way. If you have an amazing boss or an amazing mentor, great, awesome, they will. If you work at a company that's like, we are hemorrhaging, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, they're not going to take the time to advocate for you and go, well, let's make a case for why we should keep our junior designers. They go, we see a way that we can keep our books in the black, so we're going to do that. And so I think for a lot of junior designers, especially ones that are afraid of AI, go find out what your competition is, And I think that that's true of all businesses. Like, if you're afraid of finding out what your competition is, you're going to be blind to what they are doing better from. You can learn from them. So if you can, and so now the next level of that is, fine, if you understand what AI does better than you and what you do better than AI, now can you figure out how AI can help you to be a better designer? Why don't you do the things that your creative directors are doing with AI? Because now you start to level up in that way. You're using the modeling that your creative directors are doing. Because if they're using AI for this stuff, what happens if you use AI for this stuff? Don't you get better too in the same way that they get better? Don't you save time in the way that they save time? So I think a lot of it is embracing that idea, even though it's scary, even though it's new, even though it's tough. How do you embrace it and make it part of your workflow, especially if it's something that you see as inevitable? I see it as inevitable. I don't know if I'm right about that. I see it as this is going to change the way that we work. It already has for a lot of people. I don't see how that's going to reverse. Maybe, I don't know. But I see that only increasing. If you're one of the people that's like, this is a fad, this is a phase, it'll pass in a year or in 6 months. Okay, cool. That's a bet that you're making. If you don't feel comfortable making that bet, make the other bet. Make a different bet. You can do that. Make the bet that this is here to stay. I either learn to live with it and learn to work with it, or it makes me obsolete. If those are your choices, might as well try to learn how to incorporate it into what you're doing.
Yeah, I was talking with some friends recently about this idea about AI and how it's changing the industry, and we brought up that idea of back in, I guess it was 100. Actually, I think there was a Freakonomics podcast episode about the invention of the record player and how that killed the grand piano industry or the piano industry, right? And so at the time, people think, oh, why do we need a piano when we could just go buy a record and play an infinite amount of songs, as many as we can fit in a box. People who could play the piano weren't hired anymore because you got a record player. People who fix pianos weren't hired anymore because you didn't need the piano. The people working in the factories didn't have jobs anymore because no one was buying pianos, and the supply chain and all that stuff that went along with it was really interesting. And one of the things that you can kind of take away from that, though, is that the record industry created an entirely new industry with entirely new jobs and entirely new opportunities. And not only that, though, the people who were really great at building pianos, tuning pianos, fixing pianos, playing music, they could charge more because there weren't nearly as many of them anymore because all those other people opted out and got jobs somewhere else. So there's an opportunity, you mentioned writing 10, blog posts or creating 10 thumbnails. At some point in the future, there will be a human who is better at writing 10 blog post titles or making thumbnails than an AI will ever be. But those people will probably be fewer and far between. They might charge a whole lot of money because that the AI isn't as good, right? So anyway, that's kind of something interesting to kind of think about as a junior designer going forward. It's you can use it, you can get really good at your craft so you're better, or you can find something else to do.
Yes, exactly. I love that anecdote.
So, fine. I hate saying it like that because that's, obviously not very empathetic, but as someone who's been laid off recently. So, that's something that I think a lot of junior designers are failing to kind of see. It's like you mentioned this exactly, like head in the sand is going to go away, or scared of it, or terrified they're going to lose their job. It's like, embrace it, figure out how to use it, and figure out how to be more efficient so you were as valuable or more valuable than you were before. And so anyway, that Freakonomics episode is like really great episode about this. A lot of similar analogies. I don't even think they were talking about AI at the time, because this was like a while ago. I think they were talking more about just the idea of the economic impact of the record player. But there's so many analogies, I feel like, to AI and what ChatGPT has done in just the last year. So anyway, awesome advice, man. I love that. So we've got you here for a long time. We've already been talking for a little while. I want to get you out of here soon. I know you're a busy man. You got stuff to do. I got some questions I want to ask you to help our listeners get to know you a little bit better. But before we do that, any closing thoughts for those junior designers out there looking to sort of get ahead? What do you got? Anything we didn't talk about you feel is important you want to share?
It's simple and it's easier said than done, which is what I've learned is the best way to be a good designer is to design every day.
Just do it.
That's like
build a muscle.
You want to build muscles. What do? You go to the gym every day. You lift every day. Yes, all the fancy stuff can help, all the supplements and the eating routine and this thing and that thing. But like, if you don't lift, if you don't work out the muscle, it doesn't get stronger. And so I think the same thing with designers, like lots of designers and junior designers, they go to all the conferences and they listen to all the podcasts and they read all the books and and all that stuff is good. And they follow the accounts and then they tweet and then they, share their advice on Twitter and they do all the stuff and they do everything except designing every day. Like just design every day. Like it's so difficult to do because it requires discipline. But if you want to be a better designer, design something every day. And in 3 months, then look back and like measure your progress and go like, am I better now than I was 3 months ago? And then do it again 3 months from then and 3 months. Like in a year, you're going to be incredible. In a year, if you have 365 pieces of design work that you've done, you're going to be great. That is more work than a lot of people who have been doing this for 9 years have in their portfolio. You have 365 pieces of work in a year, you're killing it. Like you will see that muscle is strong. And so I think that, there's a lot of good for all of the stuff that comes around that. But at the basis, it's that thing. So that's the thing. That's the piece of encouragement I would give to anybody. 30 minutes a day is fine. 30 minutes a day, design something for 30 minutes. You'll get better at type. You'll get better at color. You'll get better at elevation. You'll get better at shapes. You'll get better at Figma. You'll get better at all that stuff just from doing it every day. So that's the thing that I would recommend to everybody.
I love that, man. Yeah, I hear from so many junior designers that are like, I'm not good at visual design. I'm not good at UI design. I guess, I don't know why, even with like illustrations and drawing, people are just like, I wasn't good at it when I was 5 years old, so I'll never be good at it. It's like, yes, there are people who are inherently good at that thing and can pick it up and can pick up any instrument and play it. But there are also people who could never do that and are really great at playing guitar and trombone and drawing and all these other things. And there are some amazing, amazing resources. Adam Donaway's Practical UI book is one that I recommend to everybody. Christina Saravi's UI design class course. Like there's so many resources out there where you can learn and get better, but if you don't do it and you don't practice, You're never going to get better. So
that's right.
I love that, man. Awesome advice. All right, Dan. So we've got a few questions that I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
You talking like a business book or like a fiction book?
Non-design book. You pick.
Non-design book. I'll pick the Count of Monte Cristo.
The Count of Monte Cristo. I love that. I love that, man. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What do you love about it? What's your favorite? What is it that?
It's so swashbuckling. I read it in 10th grade. My girlfriend recommended it to me. My girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, recommended it to me. It was one of her favorite books. And I read it and I was like, it's got everything. It's got espionage. It's got drama. It's got romance. It's got history. It's such a great book. And it was also, I think at 10th grade, it's a pretty dense book. And I think it was like one of the first dense books I've ever read. So I also felt proud after I read it too. So it's a good book. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. That, what's another one that's similar to that? Where he's Robinson Crusoe. is another one like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Like it just like the old book, it's like so thick, it's like 3 inches thick.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
I read that in high school, and it was just the idea of like all the stuff he was able to build. And it's so detailed, like all the stuff he was able to build on this island by himself. Kind of made me want to be shipwrecked or something, you know?
Right. Yeah. I wish the movie was better to kind of Monte Cristo.
Yeah, they
because
never
because
are.
the book, I mean, I guess this is true of probably most books that become movies is like the movie doesn't do the book justice.
No way. Yeah, especially those old books where they're so detailed and
Right.
stuff. You know, like there's no way you could fit it in there. All right, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
I'm addicted right now to. I think the name of the podcast is "I Will Teach You to Be Rich" by Ramit Sethi.
Okay.
It is so good. He has couples on there, and he basically goes through all of their finances and helps them figure out what they're doing wrong and how to make a new budget. And it's like he is in the weeds, and you hear all the sauce. It's great.
Oh wow, I haven't heard that before. I have to check that out. That's like, that would terrify me to go on there and like give them all that stuff and then talk about it and share it with everybody.
It's totally
I'd be like,
terrifying.
I'm like, no way. Well, I guess if it works out for him, I'm sure he makes money that way. All right. What is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something you've had at a restaurant, something your grandma used to cook, anything you've eaten.
The favorite thing I've ever eaten is this decadent dish. It's called Royal Toast, and it is made at my favorite restaurant in Philly called Royal Sushi.
Okay.
And the chef is Jesse Ito, and he's gone out for James Beard Awards and Michelin stars and all that stuff, and he should have gotten all of them. He's been robbed. I just want to say that publicly here. Royal Toast it's a piece of milk toast, and on it has toro, so fatty tuna belly sushi. It's got caviar. It's got uni, a sea urchin. It's got gold foil leaves. And lately, I had it last week, actually. He's improved it because he's also added truffle paste to it. And A5 Wagyu ribeye on top of it.
Oh my God.
It's like, it's a small piece of toast. Yeah. It's like $200, for this thing.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's so expensive. It's so decadent. It is amazing.
All right, Royal Toast. Ever make it out to Philly? After I get a Philly cheesesteak at Gino's, I'll go over there and I'll get some... and it's like
one of those, like after you get a raise at your job, you spend the money on this.
All right. So if you want to help support me going to Philly, check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can become a patron for, right on, dude. All right.
I like it.
What is your favorite vacation spot?
St. John in the Virgin Islands.
Ooh,
most beautiful place in the world.
Do you do, when you go, do you do like the all-inclusive or do you do like a little Airbnb and you stay in like a local?
We're lucky because my wife has family there, so we stay with family, and so lucky, we get the true local experience.
Oh yeah, and it's cheap.
Right, exactly.
I love it, dude. I need a family. I don't know why my wife doesn't have any family in some fancy place so I can go visit. I'm gonna have to ask her what's wrong, why she hasn't done that yet. All right, what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
So my favorite design tool, even including Figma, is Photoshop. I love Photoshop. Right. I design in Photoshop every day. I design in Photoshop more than I design in Figma. So I love Photoshop.
Uh-oh. You're gonna have the internet coming after you. What do you design in Photoshop? Are you designing, like actual posters or things like that, or where do you design
everything?
Everything.
Posters. I do photo editing. I design websites and apps in Photoshop, which is sacrilege nowadays.
Watch out, dude. Uh-oh.
All the things. Oh,
I love it. Yeah, I remember back in the day. It's funny you mentioned being like designer, web developer / designer back in the day. My first, I've been designing like websites and stuff since like the early 2000s, like 2002, 2003. And I was same kind of thing, web designer, web developer. And I was using Photoshop back, oh God, it wasn't even CS yet. I don't think, was it CS2,
no.
CS1 maybe in like 2003?
Yeah, Photoshop 2 was the first version that I used, which didn't have layers. I think layers was Photoshop 3. And then I think, then they switched to the CS, the Creative Suite.
I think I had
a while after that.
It had layers when I started, but like no symbols. It was just the freaking files, 30 megabyte files, 1,000 files for one website. Oh man, I don't miss those days.
I saved a file the other day. It was 2 gigs.
Oh my God.
Like, okay.
I love it. Well, hey man, whatever works. You're obviously doing something right. I can't fault you for that. All right, Dan. So this has been amazing, man. Awesome stuff. Real quick, before we get out of here, tell everybody out there where they can find you, all your stuff, your books, and everything you got going on. You got a ton of stuff.
Cool. Most of the socials you can find me on Twitter. I'm there. Instagram. I'm there. YouTube. I'm there. danmall.com. You can read my writing. danmall.com. You can also find my newsletter, which goes out every week. And designthatscales.com is where you can find my book. Designsystem.university is where you can find a bunch of my courses on design systems for beginners and intermediate folks and advanced folks. That's usually that's the wrap from that.
Hell yeah, right on. Cool, man. Well, Dan, it was awesome having you on. Thank you so much. Everybody check out all of Dan's stuff. Follow him on LinkedIn. You're on Twitter and all that stuff too?
Yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the places.
All the places, wherever you get your dopamine hit, find Dan, follow him there. I'm a personal fan of Dan on LinkedIn. But yeah, check Dan out, danmall.com. All this stuff will be in the show notes. Dan, thanks again. This was fantastic. I think everybody's going to learn a whole lot from this conversation. So thank you for coming on.
Awesome. Jeremy, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Dan and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on all those junior designers, what you can do to start thinking about getting ahead, what you can do in those low maturity environments where processes are inconsistent, your boss isn't doing what they should do. Make sure you follow all of Dan's advice. I love it. The networking, finding a sponsor, finding allies, getting in there and all that stuff. Don't be afraid of AI. It's going to be your friend. It's not your enemy. Don't worry, at least not for the foreseeable future. Maybe 20 years from now, we'll see. I don't know. Who knows? I'll be done by then, but you'll still be around, hopefully. But have you used any of this advice that Dan gave to further your career? Has it worked for you? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I would love to hear from you. And if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? And one more shout out to Ernest for leaving some fantastic feedback for the Beyond UX Design book. Don't forget, if you pick up the book from beyonduxdesign.com/book and you leave some honest feedback, you'll get a chance to win a shout out on the show, a badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker, a free book, or even a chance to have a one-on-one with me. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book and pre-order your copy for over 50% off for a limited time. And if you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join my buddies Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shot on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Do yourself a favor and head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/storytelling. Use the promo code BeyondUX at checkout to get 10% off Jeff's storytelling course to learn some super valuable ways to influence your team and advance your UX career. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. It's funny when I have people on that are known for a thing. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about like your second grade science fair project.
Yes,
some
exactly.
random crap like that.